Welcome to the 15 days of the session of our online session. We have a very interesting personality with us for our session today. He's none other than Dr. Majumdar. He was working with our long middle distance runners and walkers, even from the beginning. I think from 94, 95. A quite experienced person in the field of physiology and to give you some information regarding general endurance and basic endurance training. Before I welcome President of Athletic Federation, Sri Adil Sumarawalaji, to our session. He is every day with us. Once again, I'm welcoming you, sir, for the session. And I too welcome Dr. Majumdar. And over to Walker. You want to say something?
Radha, can I say something?
Yes, please, sir. Please.
Radha Volker, thank you. Welcome, Dr. Majumdar. Dr. Majumdar is a very experienced colleague of ours on the Mission Olympic Cell, as well as the head of sports sciences at Sports Authority of India. And I'm sure that you will gain a lot of knowledge from his experience. So I will have to leave in between for another call, and that is why I just wanted to welcome Dr. Majumdar as well as all of you. And I hope you have a very interesting and fruitful session. Thank you. Over to you, Walter.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I think it's a pleasure for us to have Dr. Majumdar on board today for an introduction to the basic endurance training. We've had a couple of discussions in the past months, and I'm really grateful for his support, and I'm pretty sure that he's able to significantly contribute to the further development of our middle and long distance runners and the race walkers, as Mr. Radhakrishnan mentioned. Yeah, I think we're about to start. So again, we are looking forward to your questions. Please feel free to post them in the chat box on the right side, but avoid posting your own name and things like that, yeah, so that we keep the chat free for your questions. Thanks a lot, Dr. Majumdar. We're really looking forward to your session.
Thank you, Walker, indeed. I first express my sincere gratitude to President of Athletic Federation of India, Secretary AFI, and DG Sai, Shandi Pradhanji, and Senior ED Colonel Bishnuji, and National Coach Bahadur Singh ji, and my two friends Radhakrishnan and Walker. So we are friends. So when this request has come from Mr. Walker for sharing my knowledge and experience for these athletics, I don't have any other option to say yes. So I just wanted to have some kind of, what we have done, and just to understand this thing, we require to have the basics right. So I will discuss about some of the basic information regarding exercise physiology, and then we will go for sharing the screen, and gradually we'll go to the deeper aspect of training, which all of us will enjoy. So can I share my screen now?
Yes,
yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can share your screen.
So this topic is the physiological and metabolic demand of middle and long distance runners. And for that, we need to understand what is performance. And basically the performance, there are many factors associated with performance of middle and long distance. We need to understand what is the different energy system which is underlying for performance, like aerobic system, anaerobic system. Anaerobic system has got two that very nicely talked about by one of the nutritionists. He was telling us that हमारे शरीर के अंदर 3 टैंक है, एक ATP CP system, one tank is for anaerobic glycolytic system, and the other tank, which is a big tank, which is the aerobic system. So I wanted to share with my coaches some time at Hindi so that the people will understand that. Please beg apology for that. The diet plays very important for middle and long distance, because most of the middle and long distance runners, they rely more on carbohydrate, and of course the water intake is one of the essential component, and with water they used to take the maltodextrin and this kind of stuff to have constant supply of fuel during running. Now, performance is also influenced by arousal and motivation, which is the psychological aspect, which we will not talk about here. Now, the performance is also, well, it is largely genetics, and the practice and neural endowment, the type of the body, that what kind of body, because basically the middle and long distance are basically ectomorphic, mesomorph or mesoectomorph. The muscle is not that big, but basically the linearity and the ectomorphic body like skinny is more chance for excelling that event. Of course, the environment plays very important and essential role for performance of middle and long distance. We know that in Mexico Olympics, because of the altitude, the athlete, particularly middle and long distance, suffered a lot because of lack of oxygen intake ability. Now, for that, need to understand what are the different energy system. Basically, there are three different energy. I mean, whenever we take some kind of food stuff like carbohydrate, fat. Carbohydrate is basically cereals. जो cereals हम लोग खाते हैं, जैसे चावल है, दाल है. Fats है, जैसे oil है. Proteins, there are different proteins. We used to take meat, poultry product, and all this through digestion, it is converted to monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide, which ultimately converted to glucose. Then different fat, that long fatty acid chain and short fatty acid chain, and the amino acid, again, it is converted to amino acid from protein. And these three substances, protein only take part about 5% of the entire energy pool. Otherwise, carbohydrate and fat plays very essential role for giving us the fuel in middle and long distance running. Now, the people often ask the question whether the fat is the preferred fuel or carbohydrate the preferred fuel, like glucose or fat. Basically, for breakdown of fat require more oxygen molecule for the breakdown, and carbohydrate require less oxygen molecule. So when there is a dearth of oxygen, particularly when the runners run in a higher intensity, that time carbohydrate is a preferred fuel. And जब runners low pace में भागते हैं, तब fatty acid or fat, basically that fatty acid, triglyceride and fatty acid is the preferred fuel for running. Now, when we talk about that, in a human body of 65 kilogram of body weight with 12% of body fat, if we see that individual, he has, in his body, he carries the carbohydrate of liver glycogen. Liver में जो glycogen है, उसका total जो grams है 110 grams. And if we multiply by 4, you will get the kilocalorie, which is equivalent to 451 kilocalorie. Muscle glycogen 500 and 2.050 is the kilocalorie, and the glucose is only 15 grams. So the major fuel located as carbohydrate is in the glycogen, liver glycogen. Now, the fat, you can see the subcutaneous and visceral fat, which is a huge amount of fat, which is in subcutaneous and viscera, which is around 7.8 kgs. And if you see the turnover in terms of energy, it is close to 74 or 73,320 kilocalorie is the amount of fat which can give the energy. So fat is a big amount which can give the energy in the entire endurance running. and the intramuscular fat is 161 gram, and the total kilocalorie is 1513. So the bottom line again here is we have the carbohydrate which kahan hai, liver mein hai, muscle mein hai jo carbohydrate hai, और फैट बेसिकली सबक्यूटेनियस एंड विसरल फैट है जो ज़्यादा अमाउंट में है 7.8 kg in comparison to 500 gram muscle glycogen which is in the liver, which is again substantially gives the energy during long distance. When we look at these energy and then there are three tanks which I talked about. One is the carbohydrate, which comes from glucose and glycogen. One is fat, which is coming from fatty acid and protein. This is the aerobic sources, and the anaerobic sources where the there are two anaerobic sources. I told two tanks, small two tanks. One is ATP-CP system or the alactate system, which never produce lactate in a higher quantum, and the lactic acid system or lactacid system that produce higher quantum of lactate, which comes from the breakdown of glucose and glycogen. Now, if we see that the explosiveness, I mean, any of the explosive event when a jumper jumps or when the race walker even when they start the momentum, they start the block from the block, then this is basically the energy is driven from PC and glycolysis, that is the phosphocreatine and glycolytic system. The phosphocreatine is the immediate energy, and glycolysis, if it is more than 20 seconds, then the glycolytic system takes over. So again, the thing is, first is the muscular power. When you require power, the energy comes from phosphocreatine. And the power ultimately depend on what are the fiber type and distribution and recruitment of the muscle. If the muscle is genetically gifted with fast twitch muscle fiber, then automatically the power generation would be higher. And the power generation also high because of if you are motivated enough, if your arousal level is good, then the fiber type and the distribution is also would be better and greater, and the power also will be higher. And the energy comes from phosphocreatine and the skill acquisition, which is coming from the regular practice. And this combination of these two is ultimately reflect to the performance. Is that correct?
Yes, of course. Please go ahead.
And then we are going to the broader spectrum of the activity. When the activity is 40 seconds, 20 to 40 seconds, then anaerobic glycolysis is the main source of fuel. But if the activity is more than 40 seconds, comes to around 60, 1 minute or 2 minutes, then gradually the ATP-CP system is faded away and the anaerobic glycolytic system takes over. So these three fueling systems never work in isolation. They always work together. So if we go to the next, we can see, first of all, that I have talked about the ATP-CP system, how it works. Then the ATP is located in the muscle and creatine phosphate is located in the muscle. ATP, when it breaks down in, and the enzyme responsible for breaking down is ATPase, and then it breaks down to this ATP is an adenosine triphosphate. Like adenosine is a nucleotide which is combined with 3 phosphate, that's why triphosphate. And when it makes the diphosphate, a 2 phosphate, then the enzyme, when it works, ATPase, then 1 phosphate releases out and the energy is produced. And this energy is responsible for muscle contraction. Then muscle contraction is a subsequent event. It's not a single contraction. It's a series of contraction when you run. So again, the replenishment of ATP is a key factor. And that's why the creatine phosphate, which is again the fueling system, the creatine phosphate, when the creatine breaks down in the presence of creatine kinase, then the creatine and phosphate is released. That phosphate again rephosphorylate ADP to form ATP. So again the question is, when you see that you are running the 100-meter, then from the block start, when you are accelerating, then there are three phases: acceleration, maintenance, and deceleration. But the present runner, I don't think that they are falling in deceleration at all. So now the thing is, you can see how much strength training they used to do, and they used to elevate their creatine phosphate in such a way that the creatine phosphate level is so high that the rephosphorylation process is much faster. That's why they never fall in that deceleration phase. They accelerate and accelerate. That's why over the time we see that there is the deceleration phases is faded away compared to 1995, 2000, and the present day scenario in 100-meter. But 100-meter is not our discussion. We are going to the other thing. But why I am discussing here, because we just wanted to, एक कोच ने मेरे को 90 में बोला था, उसका नाम नहीं लूंगा, लेकिन वो बोला था, ये डॉक्टर साहब ये लैक्टेट का चक्कर क्या है? So we must understand what is lactate. So to understand the lactate, that's why we are going to the next. When we are going, when our duration of activity starts from 10 seconds to 3 minutes, then 180 seconds, then you can see that when it is 40 seconds, then the anaerobic glycolysis is the key energy source. That means anaerobic glycolysis means no oxygen, and glycogen breaks down to glucose. Glucose breaks down to pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and start depositing inside the muscle. And there are some buffer, that sodium bicarbonate, and these buffer neutralize the lactate. And lactate is, now many people say these days that lactic acid is a potential fatigue agent. Any of the acid in that matter is a potential fatigue agent because they liberate the hydrogen ion. So lactic acid is a strong acid and it liberates the hydrogen ion. When the hydrogen ion liberation process, then the pH, what happened? The pH goes down. The normal pH in the body is 7.4, and when it breaks down, when the hydrogen ion is more, pH goes down and the body becoming acidic. And when the pH from 7.4 goes down to 6.9, then the entire glycolytic process, the energy turnover stops. And when it goes to further below to 6.4, then entire glycogen breakdown process is under threat. So from the glycogen, we will not get the ATP turnover. From glucose, we will not get the ATP turnover. And what ATP does, we know that what ATP does. So this is the glycolytic process where the ATP is coming out. ATP is the currency of energy. And when ATP is releasing, that ATP is responsible for muscle contraction, because here is the two protein. One is actin and one is myosin. Myosin is a thick molecule, actin is a thin molecule. And if you see this myosin, then myosin has two hinges. One is the globular head and one is the hinges. This globular head, the ATP sits down. When the ATP is attached with this globular head, then this myosin attached with the actin. When it attached with the actin, then the sliding process takes place and the muscle contraction takes place. When the muscle contraction takes place repeatedly, that's how we move. If the muscle contraction, if there is no dearth of ATP, in the ATP turnover is, whatever the desired for the muscle, then gradually we can move faster and faster. There won't be any deceleration phase. And once the ATP is not adequate to bind with the myosin head, then definitely we start decelerating. And these deceleration process, not only myosin and actin, there are many other processes of deceleration that we can discuss it further. Am I little fast, Walker?
Yes, might be a bit easier to understand for the participants if you're slowing down a bit.
Okay.
But I like the content very much. Thank you.
Right. So then मैं क्या बोलने का कोशिश कर रहा था अभी तक कि हमारा जो 3 एनर्जी सिस्टम है, 3 एनर्जी सिस्टम में एक तो है एटीपी सीपी सिस्टम, दैट इज एडिनोसिन ट्राइफॉस्फेट एंड क्रिएटिन फॉस्फेट सिस्टम। ये सिस्टम जो हम 10 सेकेंड तक जो एक्टिविटी करते हैं, जैसे 100 मीटर स्प्रिंट, तो वहाँ ये सिस्टम से ही मैक्सिमम एनर्जी आते हैं जो हमारा मसल के अंदर उपलब्ध है। मसल, उसके लिए कोई लीवर, ग्लाइकोजन और किसी का जरूरत नहीं है। नाउ द सेकेंड सिस्टम इज द एनारोबिक ग्लाइकोलाइटिक सिस्टम। हम लोग को ये पता है कि ग्लाइकोजन, मैंने पहले भी आप लोग को दिखाया कि लीवर में जो ग्लाइकोजन रहता है वो ग्लाइकोजन ब्रेक डाउन होकर ग्लूकोज होता है बाय ग्लाइकोलाइटिक प्रोसेस। फिर ग्लूकोज से जब ऑक्सीजन मिलता है तो ग्लूकोज कन्वर्टेड टू then the pyruvic acid converted to lactic there is no conversion of lactic acid, then pyruvic acid enter into the tricarboxylic acid cycle or TCA cycle and वहां से एनर्जी देता है एरोबिकली। जब ऑक्सीजन नहीं मिलता है तो pyruvic acid then converted to lactic acid, जब and lactic acid start building up। जब लैक्टिक एसिड बिल्डअप होता है तो लैक्टिक एसिड क्या करता है? लैक्टिक एसिड, आई टोल्ड, इट इज रिलीजिंग द हाइड्रोजन आयन। व्हेन द हाइड्रोजन आयन रिलीज इज मोर, देन द हाइड्रोजन आयन गोज एंड सिट्स ऑन द ट्रोपोनिन मॉलिक्यूल, जिसमें कैल्शियम को बैठना था वहां जाके ट्रोपोनिन बैठ जाता है, कैल्शियम को बैठने नहीं देता। एक तो है ये, जब कैल्शियम बैठेगा, जब यहाँ मायोसिन में एटीपी बैठेगा तभी एक्टोमायोसिन कॉम्प्लेक्स फॉर्मेशन होगा। जब तक कैल्शियम नहीं बैठने देगा तो देयर इज नो एक्टोमायोसिन कॉम्प्लेक्स, देयर इज नो कॉन्ट्रैक्शन। सो जो पीएच क्या करते हैं, जाके फिर दोबारा मैं बोल रहा हूँ, ये जाके जो एक्टिव साइड ऑफ द एक्टिन मॉलिक्यूल जो ट्रोपोनिन है, ट्रोपोनिन का ऊपर बैठ जाता है, कैल्शियम को बैठने नहीं देता है। जब कैल्शियम इसके ऊपर नहीं बैठेगा तब मायोसिन, अगर एटीपी मिल भी गया, मायोसिन एक्टिन के साथ बाइंड नहीं कर पाएगा। अगर एटीपी टर्नओवर इज नॉट एज रिक्वायर्ड, देन यहाँ एटीपी भी नहीं है, यहाँ हाइड्रोजन भी बैठा हुआ है, देयर वोंट बी एनी एक्टोमायोसिन फॉर्मेशन, देयर इज नो फर्दर दिस स्लाइडिंग फेनोमेना, और द मसल का जो कॉन्ट्रैक्शन रेट में तब्दीली आएगा and gradually the muscle will lead to the fatigue state. Is that right?
Yeah, sure.
Now the lactate जो हमने बता रहा था अभी तक, जो लैक्टिक एसिड तैयार हुआ, ये लैक्टिक एसिड जो मसल के अंदर तैयार हुआ, ये लैक्टिक एसिड फिर मसल से ब्लड में जाएगा और ब्लड से ये मसल में पहुंचेगा। जो मसल में जो कैटास्ट्रॉफी हो रहा है, जो पीएच का वजह से, मैं आपको ये भी बताया था कि जब हाइड्रोजन आयन पहले तो मसल का ट्रोपोनिन का ऊपर बैठ गया था, एक्टोमायोसिन कॉम्प्लेक्स फॉर्मेशन होने नहीं दे रहा था, ये तो एक रीजन है। दूसरा, लैक्टेट जब नॉर्मल पीएच अल्टरेशन होगा, नॉर्मल पीएच कितना है? 7.4। When hydrogen ion is more, the body becoming acidic, that means the pH level goes down. जब pH level from 7.4 pH level goes to 6.9 because of the releasing of hydrogen, तब क्या होगा? हाइड्रोजन जाके आपका जो ग्लाइकोलाइटिक पाथवे से जो एनर्जी मिल रहा था वो एनर्जी नहीं मिलेगा। देयर आर 2 रेट लिमिटिंग एंजाइम, फॉस्फोराइलेज एंड फॉस्फोफ्रुक्टोकाइनेज, जो ग्लाइकोलाइटिक पाथवे में एक्टिवेटेड है। वो 2 एंजाइम को वो डीनेचर कर देगा, तो वहां से आपको एनर्जी नहीं मिलेगा। तो देयर इज अ डेथ ऑफ एटीपी फ्रॉम ग्लाइकोलाइटिक पाथवे। ये अगर 6.9 से 6.4 आ जाएगा तो फिर ये जो आपका जो ग्लाइकोजन ब्रेकडाउन से जितना एनर्जी मिल रहा था वो भी नहीं मिलेगा। ग्लाइकोजन से एनर्जी मिलना बंद हो गया, ग्लूकोज से एनर्जी मिलना बंद हो गया, तो देयर वुड बी अ शॉर्टफॉल ऑफ एटीपी इन द मसल व्हिच लीड्स टू रिफ्लेक्ट फॉर द स्लोइंग डाउन ऑफ द मसल कॉन्ट्रैक्शन। नाउ द डिस्टेंस रनर और द मिडिल डिस्टेंस रनर, व्हाट दे डज, दे हैव their LDH level is something different. LDH is lactate dehydrogenase, जो पाइरुवेट से लैक्टेट को कन्वर्ट करते हैं। Now LDH of distance runner, जो distance runner है, they are gifted with heart form of LDH or H4 form of LDH. तो ये हार्ट फॉर्म जो LDH का है वो लैक्टेट से पाइरोवेट ट्रांसफर ज्यादा करते हैं. तो लैक्टेट तैयार हो रहा है तो फिर इमीडिएटली ट्रांसफर टू पाइरोवेट. So that's why it is again, that's why the bottom line is the marathoner produce very low lactate compared to 400-meter runners. Because of their training, the maximum lactate of the long distance runners is relatively much lower compared to the middle distance. Because their lactate is, the maximum lactate production of the marathoner is close to around 7 to 8 millimole per liter, whereas the 400-meter runner, their peak lactate is close to around 18 to 20, even 24 millimole per liter. So why they are producing less lactate? Because their LDH level is different. That is the enzyme which convert pyruvate to lactate and lactate to pyruvate. It is reversible reaction. तो वो अगर ज्यादा LDH हार्ट फॉर्म का है, वो लैक्टेट तैयार होने का साथ साथ ही लैक्टेट को कन्वर्ट करते हैं पाइरुवेट में, फिर एनर्जी देता है आपका एरोबिक प्रोसेस में. And one more thing is when the lactate in the blood is more, it goes to liver where the Cori cycle is being operated. Cori cycle के दौरान फिर ये lactate pyruvate में ट्रांसफर होता है, pyruvate से फिर ये ग्लूकोज बनाता है और ग्लूकोज फिर ब्लड में आके फिर aerobically it gives energy. So this is how it happens when we are looking at the second system which I talked about, the lactic acid system or anaerobic glycolytic system. I will address many, I will love to address the question what during the question hour session. Now the next thing is that is how the aerobic energy takes from the aerobic energy, glucose, glycolysis, pyruvate converted inside the mitochondria. When the pyruvate goes inside the mitochondria, then mitochondria के अंदर वो acetyl CoA होता है. फिर TCA cycle mitochondria के अंदर जो TCA cycle और Krebs cycle जो चलते हैं, Krebs cycle के दौरान जो ATP turnover बढ़ता है. और this ATP और एक चीज है जो मैं ज्यादातर बोलना नहीं पसंद करता हूँ, because this is not an academic discussion, this is more towards training. So just to understand that, that's why I just wanted to limit myself very brief. ये जो आपका जो पाइरुवेट से जब क्रेब्स जो ग्लाइकोलाइटिक पाथवे में जो NAD निकालते हैं 3-फॉस्फोग्लिसरॉल्डिहाइड, ये जब कन्वर्ट होता है तो जो NAD निकालते हैं वो NAD क्या करते हैं, हाइड्रोजन, जो हाइड्रोजन मैं बोला था लैक्टिक एसिड रिलीजेस हाइड्रोजन, ये हाइड्रोजन को ये क्या करता है, बाइंड करता है NADH. This NADH is enter inside the mitochondria and then NADH gives in electron transport chain, NADH goes and releases hydrogen inside mitochondria, electron transport chain and producing ATP. So there are three things which require in aerobic system. One is ATP is releasing inside mitochondria, inside the matrix of mitochondria through Krebs cycle, and ATP is released. But for releasing ATP, you require NAD to bind hydrogen, and this NAD, when it enters the electron transport chain, then only the ATP in a bigger quantum or bigger magnitude is released. And once the ATP, that's why mitochondria are called as the powerhouse of the cell, because the most of the ATP is liberating inside the mitochondria, and when it goes inside the once it formed inside the mitochondria, then it comes to the cytosol for giving the energy. Now we are going to aerobic system. What is really essence of middle and long distance? So I want your full attention, participants' attention, please. Now, VO2 max is one of the very important factor for aerobic performance. What is your maximum oxygen uptake capacity? Maximum oxygen uptake capacity is depend on two areas. One is your cardiac output. That means the amount of blood ejected by the heart in 1 minute. That is what is your stroke volume. एक stroke में कितना खून आपका heart का बाहर जा रहा है. और आप कितना बार आपका धुकपुक हो रहा है आपका जो हार्ट में. If the heart rate is that is the maximum heart rate and maximum stroke volume, अगर इस दोनों को आप मल्टीप्लाई करेंगे तो आपको मिलेगा maximum cardiac output. So maximum cardiac output is the one factor of the VO2 max. So VO2 max, there are two factors which is very important for maximum oxygen uptake capacity. एक तो है आपका जो कार्डियक आउटपुट कितना है, मतलब कितना खून आपका हार्ट का बाहर आता है. सेकेंड थिंग विच इज अगेन इज इम्पोर्टेंट इज आपका आर्टरी में कितना खून जा रहा है. आर्टरी में आपका पार्शियल प्रेशर कितना है और वेन में पार्शियल प्रेशर कितना है. मतलब आर्टरी जो शुद्ध खून को कैरी करता है उसमें ऑक्सीजन का कितना ऑक्सीजन है, और जो टिश्यू लेवल में जहाँ से आपका वेन ऑक्सीजन जब आर्टरी जब ऑक्सीजन छोड़ता है टिश्यू में, फिर टिश्यू जो कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड प्रोड्यूस करता है, जब खून अशुद्ध हो गया वो खून को वेन द्वारा फिर आपको हार्ट में लाया जाता है. तो कितना ऑक्सीजन का मात्रा है आपका आर्टरी में और कितना ऑक्सीजन का मात्रा है आपका वेन में, इसका डिफरेंस क्या है, that is also very important for maximum oxygen uptake. There are two compartments for oxygen uptake. One is the cardiac output and one is called arteriovenous oxygen difference. मतलब आर्टरी में ऑक्सीजन का क्षमता कितना है, वेन में ऑक्सीजन लेने का क्षमता कितना है. नॉर्मली आर्टरी में ऑक्सीजन लेने का क्षमता जो है 20 ml ऑफ ऑक्सीजन पर 100 ml ऑफ ब्लड, एंड ये जो रेस्टिंग कंडीशन में, एंड वेन में जो ऑक्सीजन लेने का क्षमता, ऑक्सीजन उपलब्ध है वो है 26 ml ऑफ ऑक्सीजन पर 100 ml ऑफ ब्लड. तो 20 और 14, सॉरी 20 एंड 14, 20 है आपका आर्टरी में और 14 ml ऑफ ऑक्सीजन पर 100 ml ऑफ ब्लड है वेन में. तो डिफरेंस है 6. तो दिस डिफरेंस इफ इट इज बीइंग वाइडर, हाउ कैन इट बी वाइडर? जब आपका जो टिश्यू में ऑक्सीजन कंजम्पशन, ऑक्सीजन को यूटिलाइजेशन जब ज्यादा होगा तो डेफिनेटली वेनस एंड में ड्रॉप होगा, आर्टेरियल एंड में ड्रॉप नहीं होगा. वेनस क्या करेगा, वेनस एंड में ऑक्सीजन जल्दी से जल्दी ऑक्सीजन यूज होगा, तो वेनस एंड में ऑक्सीजन का जो मात्रा है वो फॉल करेगा. तो आर्टेरियल एंड में ऑक्सीजन सेम है, तो वेनस एंड में फॉल करने के बाद ये ग्रेडियंट वाइड होगा. जब ये ग्रेडियंट वाइड होगा
Dr. Majumdar, we have a lot of participants coming from the south, so maybe we focus on English if that's possible and just give a short introduction. Yeah, sorry for that.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm comfortable with that. It is difficult for me to even.
Okay, perfect.
So when this difference of oxygen in venous blood and the arterial blood is here, venous blood is here. If the venous blood end the oxygen drops and arterial end the oxygen is remaining stationary, then there is a drop in arteriovenous. There is the gradient goes up, and as the gradient goes up, the VO2 max also will go up. So cardiac output is what are the essential components the cardiac output depend on? One is heart rate max, one is maximum stroke volume, and it also VO2 max also depend on the arteriovenous oxygen difference, arterial oxygen content and venous end oxygen content. Arterial oxygen content is depend on hemoglobin. What is your hemoglobin? That's why hemoglobin and iron profile is very important parameters for assessing the middle and long distance runner. And this venous end depend on the fiber type. If you are born with slow twitch fiber more, then definitely you have the capacity to use oxygen as a faster rate in the venous end. And if the mitochondrial and capillary density more, further your efficiency of using oxygen would be more. There is a drop in the oxygen in the venous end. The arterial end will remain same. There is a gradient will fall down. If the gradient fall down, if the stroke volume is more, it will reflect to your VO2 max. Is that right? Is that any clarification required, Volker, on this?
I think that's fine. We haven't received a question yet, so yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So now we are going to the longer duration, which is around 21 to 60 minutes or 1 hour. So the VO2 max is no longer is very important indicator for performance. But what percentage of VO2 max we are running and what is the lactate threshold, that plays very essential role for understanding the aerobic performance, which lasting for 21 to 60 minutes. That is uh, the middle distance and the beginning of the long distance. So the lactate threshold also depend on what type of fiber or type 1 fiber you have. The fiber type is also, if you have the more type 1 muscle fiber, if the percentage is more, then definitely the mechanics of your movement will reflect is better. If the percentage of type 1 fiber, it reflect to it will improve your bioenergetics. Both the factor will improve your economy of running, and ultimately it reflect to the performance. And percentage of VO2 is again greatly influenced by two factor. One is heat load and one is dehydration. If that's why I always suggest the athlete that they should have a proper hydration process of carrying their bottle in the ground. And particularly for hot summer in Patiala or in Kerala, where the summer season is quite scorchy and the athletes sweat a lot. So that time the management of hydration plays a very important role, and both influence with the percentage of VO2 max. So the ultra event like 1 to 4 hours, that is marathon and triathlon, where all things are similar, but here we rely more on recuperation of the energy, that is the liver and muscle glycogen store gradually going to be depleted, and there would be the supplement during exercise plays very essential role. And the concept of pre-game meal is also essential to elevate your liver and muscle glycogen store, which can lead to the better percentage of VO2 max for improving the running economy and give them the better performance. Now there are two aspects of the training of middle and long distance. We are gradually going enter into the domain of training domain. So there are two aspects of adaptation in middle and long distance. One is the central adaptation and one is peripheral adaptation. Central adaptation is happening in your lungs and heart, and peripheral adaptation happening in your muscle, the muscular adaptation and the cellular adaptation. I make it very clear that the central adaptation happen when you work more below 80 and at 80. When you are working below the anaerobic threshold and at anaerobic threshold, then the cardiovascular thing is happening, and it happens when you are going more towards the slow continuous run. So there, the entire thing, why I'm telling, because the central adaptation, for that you must rely on basic aerobic adaptation, and that is only happen through slow continuous run. But when you rely on the fast continuous and your interval training, that time 95 to 100% of maximum aerobic power, that is the interval training, the longer interval of interval training, which happen and that cause the localized muscular adaptation. This kind of interval training never have that has got the stimulus for improving the cardiovascular adaptation, but it happened in the muscular adaptation. Now, as we were talking about the energy system, that by now I think the participant must now understood that there are three energy systems which we talked about. One is ATP-PC system, adenosine triphosphate, and this phosphocreatine system. Duration you can see 10 seconds. Then we talk about the lactic acid system, which is here, which is going up, and the duration is around 20 seconds to 40 seconds and 30 seconds. Then gradually it goes down. And if it more than 40 or 50 or 60 seconds, that means 1 minute, then the reliance is, of course, on aerobic system. So these are the three energy system, and this is the duration, and this is the energy contribution. But I again make it very clear that all these three energy systems never work in isolation. They always work in combination. So now, what are the fuel source in aerobic system? Then anaerobic system and anaerobic lactate system, that is the 10 seconds duration. Then this is a short term, which is called the anaerobic system up to 40 seconds to 45 seconds. And that is the aerobic system. It starts from 1 minute and continue up to 2 hours or more. So the fuel system is the oxygen system. And of course, if it longer than 2 minutes, and at higher intensity, if you are running for a faster interval session, then obviously there is a significant overlap of anaerobic system along with the aerobic system. The second energy system is the 100% intensity, 10 seconds and 2 minutes. It's a lactic acid system, and that is for 2 to 2.5 to 10 seconds up to 2 to 2.5 minutes. And this is the ATP-CP system that is for creatine, and that is the duration is 10 seconds. That we have already discussed, but just to have the repetition, I just wanted to tell you that. Now for coaches, it is important that how to recuperate the system after the training, because that again a very essential information which I wanted to share with you, that after the training, recovery of fuel store after the use highly depend on the intensity. For aerobic system, if the low intensity, it takes 6 to 24 hours of recuperation. If it is a higher intensity, it takes longer duration, that is 24 to 36 hours to recuperate the entire glycogen store inside your muscle and liver. Then the athlete's ability developed by training system is the aerobic power. Then the anaerobic system, which is the speed endurance system with the lactate, is the dominant factor which start depositing in the muscle. When you want to develop the speed endurance, then the 20%, 25% in 10 minutes, 50% in 25 minutes, the removal of lactate, and 100% in 75 minutes. But it is in low intensity, can load, but when you are that's why the concept of limbering down is very essential, because after the intense workout of interval session and anaerobic interval session, you need to rely on the limbering down so that you can flush the lactate outside the muscle into the blood and into the Cori cycle, and to replenish it to glycogen. The replenishment of glycogen following continuous high intensity endurance activity, 60% replenished in 10 hours and 100% in 48 hours. That means again the high intensity, again the continuous, when you are high intensity continuous run, you can see the 2 days required to recuperate the liver and muscle glycogen. The replenishment of glycogen following intermittent work activity, that is 40% in 2 hours, 55% in 2 hours, further 2 hours, and 100% in 24 hours. And when you target this particular system, then you are targeting to develop the muscular endurance and speed endurance. And aerobic system, 50% replenished in 30 seconds. Anaerobic system, immediate source, that is the speed. So this is the anaerobic long term. This is aerobic long term. This is the endurance. This is the oxygen system. This is speed endurance, and this is the sprint system. The 50% is developed for replenishing for 30 seconds and 2 minutes or complete restoration if resting. And it develops power and maximum speed. So again, there are different energy system. You can see the relative intensity is 25% of your VO2 max. Then the major source of fuel is plasma free fatty acid, which is the free fatty acid is the essential component which gives you the energy. When you are running 65%, when you are running with a higher intensity, then this reliance of fat goes down, and reliance of carbohydrate or muscle glycogen is much more prominent. So when you are running close to your, near to your threshold or to your threshold and further little away of your threshold, then again the muscle glycogen is the preferred fuel, not the fat. The fat always work when you are doing for low intensity workout, not with a high intensity workout. So this is the percentage of aerobic and anaerobic percentage of different event of different duration. Can we move?
Yes, let's go ahead. Dr. Majumdar, do you have a source for this overview? Because I think it's pretty accurate and a good overview for our coaches.
Sorry?
Do you have a source of this chart?
I can share the entire thing to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Yep. So now we are going to the lactate. The lactate, I told you that one of the earlier days, one of the coaches asked, what is the essence of lactate? What is lactate, and why do people talk about lactate so much? Now, I think I have created the little base, if I'm not mistaken. So the lactate is the glycolysis, that is glycogen. When the glycogen breaks down, it is called lysis. Breakdown is lysis. When glycogen breaks down, it is, or the glucose breakdown, it is called glycolysis. Lysis means breakdown, and as the glucose is breaking down, it is glycolysis. Glycolysis yields pyruvate. Glucose, glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, like that. There are a sequence of events, and after that, it converts to pyruvate. When pyruvate doesn't have the oxygen in the system or in the cytoplasm, then the glycolysis, in anaerobic glycolysis, in no oxygen, when the glycolysis is being operated, then the pyruvate is converted to lactic acid. Then the pyruvate converts to lactic acid. Lactic acid basically highly unstable. Lactic acid is not stable, and this is quite a strong acid. So it dissociates, and it dissociates into hydrogen ion. So there are, I mean, sodium bicarbonate, I told there are buffer who can release sodium, and that buffer, I mean, they neutralize lactate by converting lactate to sodium lactate, because it attaches with the sodium molecule and the sodium lactate form. So now, when does it increase? When the lactate increase? They increase as the exercise intensity increases. When the exercise intensity increases, lactic acid also increases. The steep increase is 50 to 60% of the VO2 max. When you are running 50 to 60% of your maximum, then obviously your lactic acid your lactic acid increase. the anaerobic threshold, lactate threshold, lactic acid inflection point, all these, because there are a lot of confusion in the entire coaching community, because somebody talks about OBLA, somebody talks about lactate inflection point, some of the coach believe in lactate, individual lactate threshold, some used to talk about the lactate threshold, not the individual lactate threshold. So there are a lot of confusion. Just to clear the confusion, let us see that the lactate, again, is the net result of lactate production and lactate removal. Because I talked that the lactate, once it produced inside the muscle, there is equally the system is try to again neutralize the lactate. So whatever the blood lactate we are getting in from pricking the fingertip or earlobe, that is the delta of production and removal. That is the difference of production and removal. We are not going to the academic discussion here. But whatever the lactate we are getting here, from the training perspective, what is important, if we put the lactate against your percentage of VO2 max, you can see here the 25% of the VO2 max when the runner runs, then his lactate level is here. Then 50% of the VO2 max, again his lactate is here, the same runner. When he is exceeding his running pace to 75%, then his lactate goes to here, which is more than 4 or 5 millimoles. Then it goes up. So the break, where the linearity is breaking down, that is called the threshold. And if you compare these two runners, one is red and yellow, yellow is untrained and red is the trained runner. If you compare these two, you can see the trained person always, their threshold appear with a higher percentage of VO2 max compared to the runner who are untrained, their threshold appears relatively lower percentage of VO2 max. And why it is happening? Because the low tissue oxygen, because the oxygen is not adequate in the tissue. The reliance of glycolysis, because once there is no oxygen, the system is rely on more glycolysis, activation of the fast twitch fiber, and reduce the lactate removal. These are the 4 causes which increase the lactate. Now, there are 3 types of different muscle fiber in the spectrum of the muscle. One is called type 1, type 2A, and type 2B. So type 1 is basically suiting for long distance, which is slow twitch muscle fiber, and fast twitch oxidative is for 800, 1500, 400. Somebody used to, I mean, I can argue that 400. So I believe in 800 and 1500 would be the type 2A, where the fast twitch oxidative, and fast twitch glycolytic is basically short sprint of 200 and 400. So that's my idea of interpreting. It is not my data. It's data has been taken from the sources. But I definitely believe that type 2A is basically for 800 and 1500, not for 400. So now we are going for the anaerobic threshold. You can see the athlete with a similar VO2 max. Both the athlete A and athlete B, they have the same VO2 max. Their VO2 max is 65 ml per kg per minute. But what is the essence is their threshold, anaerobic threshold, is 65 and 65.1. So the anaerobic threshold of this runner, type 2 athlete, is relatively on higher percentage of VO2 max, and therefore he can be of successful athlete compared to this runner. That is how we interpret that the athletes in terms of the percentage of VO2 max at the threshold. Now, the functional significance of lactate threshold, whilst the high VO2 max is a prerequisite for success in endurance event, the ability to sustain the percentage of VO2 max without accumulating fatigue is of greater importance. The threshold lactate, T stands for threshold, is a functional index of muscle metabolism. Lactate inhibit lipolysis. Why it inhibits lipolysis? Because the lipolysis, lactate, once it builds up, then there is a dearth of oxygen. That's why the lactate is building up. I told you that only fat breakdown require more oxygen molecules. So if the lactate breaking down, that means once the lactate produced, there is a dearth of oxygen in the system, and that prevents the lipolysis. That's why it inhibits lipolysis or utilization of fat, and accelerated glycogen utilization. Glycogen breaks down to glucose, and glucose converted to pyruvate, pyruvate converted to lactate, and the well-trained marathon runner operate just above T lactate. They always used to go for more than the lactate threshold. The T lactate is essential for essential index or the functional index for muscle fatigue. High level of hydrogen ion interfere with enzyme activity, which I already talked about, and the cross-bridge attachment with the muscle, that actomyosin complex formation. So if you see here, the best performance in 3000 meter time in steeplechase, and here the lactate threshold speed. The lactate threshold speed, and here the performance. So once the threshold speed is low, then the timing is also bad. When the timing improves, because of the threshold improves. Now the threshold, how we do it, because you can see the running speed here, and here the heart rate. So lactate, every time we don't use this lactate to be taken every day or weekly. Lactate is no meaning for athletes monitoring process. What we need to do, we see that in when the threshold appear, what is the heart rate? And that's why the heart rate at threshold, one of the very important criteria for monitoring the athlete. Here we can see the threshold is appearing in 152 beats per minute, where this thing, there is an upward surge in a much larger magnitude. And that's why it is the threshold appearing in this point, and the corresponding heart rate we used to take to monitor the athlete over the period of time, not for taking every week or every month the lactate. Once we are sure that the athlete is improving, maybe quarterly or based on the periodization, we used to have the lactate analysis done.
Dr. Majumdar, since we have a lot of questions on this topic, would you mind elaborating how you identify the lactic threshold?
We can, but before that, let me find out that, and then we can go to the dynamic, I mean, audiovisual thing.
Of course.
So these metabolic factors, even the inadequate oxygen delivery or hypoxia due to lowered oxygen content and lowered blood level. Then imbalance between the rate of glycolysis, that means anaerobic glycolysis and aerobic system. When there is an imbalance of anaerobic and aerobic system, that produce more lactate. The increase, I will not discuss about that. Increased catecholamine, like there are some hormone which influence the glycolysis, which is adrenaline and noradrenaline. So imbalance the rate of glycolysis and mitochondrial respiration, hydrogen release to glycolysis. Now this thing, factor that influence the production and oxidation of lactate, because when we are doing for the endurance training for a longer period of time, that improve your economy, and that improve as the economy has improved, that means increased delivery of oxygen. It causes, because of the stroke volume increase, the cardiac output increase, the capillarization through endurance training increases, and therefore utilization of oxygen because of the mitochondrial density also increases, capillarization increases, so the cellular uptake of oxygen increase and utilization of oxygen also increase. And if you this 1 and 2, increase lower necessity for anaerobic glycolysis at a given workload. There is no necessity for the anaerobic system to work. That's why the aerobic system is much better, better because they improve the system. Therefore, because of the economy has improved, because the gate mechanics improved, there is no need for the anaerobic system to stressed out. Therefore, the aerobic system now prevailing for distance group. Therefore, the lower lactate production and increased oxidation of lactate. I talked about the LDH, the different lactate dehydrogenase, increase of capillarization, and there are GLUT1 which transfer lactate inside the cell for converting to again to pyruvate. So this I will talk about the maximum lactate steady state. That is more important for rather than lactate threshold. Now the present coaches, most of the coaches, they used to rely on maximum lactate steady state than the lactate itself. How to measure the maximum lactate steady state? In constant load exercise, the individual can actually sustain at higher intensity than the T lactate. Then the threshold lactate, I wanted to give the intensity just above the threshold lactate. If we do that, the higher intensity that sustained, there is a balance between the lactate production and removal from the blood, and the maximum lactate steady state appear. I will show you, but it is time consuming, but it is really the essence of success for any of the distance runner, particularly those who are running for 5,000, 10,000 in marathon. Now, first of all, first day I have taken, it is not in the same day we have to do. We have to do in a subsequent day 5 sample or 6 sample to be taken at different speed. This is for cyclists, this is not for the runners data, so don't mistake it, because the kilometer per hour you can see here for the distance group. So it is a road cyclist data, but just try to understand the concept. So the first, when he is running for 35 kilometer per hour bicycling, his data was like that. Then 38 kilometer, then the data was like that. In once we have taken the sample for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes of 6 sample. Then we have taken on 42 kilometer per hour when he was cycling on the road. And then we have taken when he was 46 kilometer per hour. And then we have taken for 50 kilometer per hour. So here, the threshold possibly happening here, not here and not here. So you can see that, or in between here, the most of the coaches now these days believe that if the difference is not more than 1 millimole, if it is 4 millimole or 4.5 millimole, if the next load, next intensity, it never exceeds 5.5 millimole, then they think that the 5.5 millimole is the maximum lactate steady state, not the 4 millimole or not the 4.5 millimole. So lactate is also one of the important factor for how the lactate is increasing, how in the velocity of time, and the clearance. You can see the clearance of lactate is very important when this is the beginning of the season, and this is the before the taper. So you can see before the taper, the removal rate is quite faster. So you can even track the recovery response of the athlete by taking the lactate. Lactate value not only give you the indication of the athlete's performance parameter, but even for how best they are training status over the period of time, they are improving their training status, can also be quite reliable indicator through lactate. I will just go directly to training because the time is not much now. So there are the types of exercise. For the coaches, please pay attention because this is basically for you. This is the anaerobic, this is the aerobic anaerobic, and this is the aerobic. So the duration of exercise is 1 to 2 minutes. This is anaerobic. Aerobic and anaerobic 3 to 10 minutes and 11 to 35 minutes. And this is a mixed zone. That's why many of the coaches these days, they work in a mixed zone more than the aerobic zone for preparing their athlete for middle and long distance. Because the aerobic zone, when it is 36 to 90 minutes, then 90 to 360 and greater than 360. Then in what percentage they work in terms of VO2 max? When they are developing the aerobic base, then they work in a lower percentage of VO2 max, 50 to 60%, 60 to 85%, and 80 to 95%. That is close to threshold. This is for their base preparation. When they are working with a preparatory phase and the pre-competition phase, in the first phase of the pre-competition phase, when they are going for the pre-competition and competition phase, then they work more on this zone, which is aerobic and anaerobic and purely anaerobic. Then you can see that the aerobic anaerobic ratio, how it goes. This is the anaerobic 50-50, then aerobic anaerobic 80-20, and this is the breakdown of glycogen also has shown here. When you are going more for anaerobic zone and the aerobic anaerobic zone, then anaerobic zone, the liver and muscle glycogen not is essential component to give you the energy. That's why the depletion rate is quite low. As you are going to stimulate the aerobic and anaerobic, then when you are going for anaerobic again, the depletion of glycogen is little higher compared to anaerobic. It is 30% or 30% of muscle glycogen. When you are going gradually to anaerobic, there is 40% aerobic zone. The glycogen depletion is more than the aerobic. Of course, the liver and muscle glycogen, as I told, it's more, depletion rate is faster. And the lactate, I told you initially that the marathoner produced less lactate, and when you are doing the aerobic activity and the higher level of aerobic activity, the lactate level, even the threshold and below threshold, it's 8 millimole. But when you are going for anaerobic activity for interval training, then definitely your lactate level goes up, which is 18 for anaerobic, then aerobic anaerobic 20 and 14. And this is the free fatty acid oxidation is more for aerobic activity compared to the anaerobic activity. Many of raised their hand. Can I take call? Can I take the question, Volker?
Are you done with your presentation?
No,
or?
there are three training aspects is still yet to address.
Yeah, I think we finish the training aspects first, and then afterwards we have a question and answering, I think.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the aerobic, again, aerobic is basically, remember this base aerobic activity, then the economy aerobic training, and then the aerobic power and aerobic endurance. Before aerobic power, aerobic endurance. Though B stands for base preparation, E stands for economy, aerobic economy training, and aerobic endurance, and then comes to aerobic power. There are 4 phases of aerobic training. So the time, you can see here the time, see here the blood lactate, see here the heart rate, and the training means. What are the training means has been given for different developing the different component of the aerobic system. I this thing is in front of you so that you can see and ask me the question when I will take you the question. Because the entire presentation, I will just share it to all of you so that you can see it, and even you can note down my mail. I can even available in my mail or through Walker. I can take your question even if the time doesn't permit.
Thank you so much.
And that is the last one. I just wanted to, this is the blood lactate, and this is the exercise intensity. You can see here the exercise intensity is less than 80%. There's of marathon velocity. The recovery workout is lactate is 1. Exercise endurance, that is 1 to 1.1 millimole. where the marathon runner is running with a quite higher percentage, 80 to 90% of his marathon velocity. Even intensive endurance training, it never lactate goes up to 1.3, and 90 to 97. Tempo endurance too. That I'm talking about very, very highly rated endurance, marathoner. And extensive interval, that's the fartlek is 3, and intensive interval, it never exceeds to more than 8 millimoles per liter. Thank you. As the time is the constraint, I will not go further. I will take the question more so that we can interact.
Thank you very much.
Before, welcome, 1 minute. I like to inform the participants, please don't go to the chat box with bilateral discussions. We all should know Hindi as well as a little bit of English. So kindly don't fill the chat box with such bilateral discussions. Avoid and refrain from that. That's only you can continue, Walker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Majumdar. I think that was a very insightful presentation. We have a couple of questions, and maybe we start with the first one, which I feel is of utmost importance to understand for our coaches, and that's how do you estimate the anaerobic threshold?
Well, can I remove from the chat box from
of course.
This presentation?
Sure.
Yeah, you can. Now you can now. Yeah. So, well, basically, we used to rely on Scout, which is the lactate analyzer. We used to give the different intensity, starting from very low intensity, and gradually we increase the intensity. And the intensity basically starts from 60, 70, 75, 85, 90, and then maximum like this, because normally threshold appears 75 to 85% of your maximum ability. So that is the critical zone. If we miss the critical zone, then it is again difficult to interpret the lactate. That's why we start from, after proper warm up, we used to start from 60% of his maximum ability or 60% of his maximum heart rate, then goes to 70, 75, 80, 85, and then goes to 90 and above. So that is how in that intensity we used to take the blood sample from fingertip and take a drop of blood from the finger, and then we used to collect. There is a ready reckoner, right? Glucometer. We have the lactate analyzer, which is Lactate Scout or Lactate Pro, which we can carry to the field and insert the strip, and then a drop of blood can put a drop of blood on the strip, and it immediately gives the result. So that is how we used to measure the lactate. And then we used to speed and lactate. We used to have the through Excel sheet we can do that by speed lactate measurement.
And maybe just to inform our coaches, like 5 to 10 years ago, I think a lot of physiologists, they still used the threshold of 4 millimole to estimate this. But now I think most physiologists all around the world, they're using this individual anaerobic threshold, and that can actually depend, of course, on the performance. And if I'm correct, it's usually between 3 and 6 millimole of lactic acid, and it's actually when the lactate building rate starts to become exponentially.
Right, absolutely true. Because they rely, even the 4 millimole is the concept of Mader and Kinderman, because these two are working in Leipzig, and they only coined this obla. And after that, the obla was 70s, very popular, and many of the athletes used to train in the lab rather than in the field. So after that, the 80s and 90s, the people still believe on 4 millimole, but when the MLSS came, the maximum lactate steady state, then the people start realizing that why I should run in a low intensity when I can run in a higher intensity without producing much more lactate. The lactate, when it goes more than 6 millimole, then it abruptly goes up. But 5 to 6, even as you were telling, is right. That's why MLSS plays very important role for assessing the lactate for the middle, particularly for marathoner and 5 and 10,000 K.
And how can you use such data to improve your training? You mentioned that, of course, we have to develop the basic endurance, to generate a right shift of the lactate curve. And at the same time, we need to improve our VO2 max.
Right.
How can you use such information which you've described today to further enhance or individualize your training?
Right, absolutely. As I told you, for the regeneration or for the base preparation of the athlete, we rely more on slow continuous run. And for maintaining the aerobic base, we definitely will rely more on fast continuous and the close to maximum aerobic power, which is around fast continuous, which is around 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, for depending on the level of athlete, at least 1 or 2 sessions even in the base preparation as well, to maintain the VO2, whatever the VO2 they have, to maintain that. But the threshold training, the threshold heart rate, as I shown you, that the threshold heart rate we used to take for the distance group, and that heart rate we used to give train them for that heart rate different interval training. For interval training we never rely on the threshold, but for maximum for the economy and for endurance we rely on more for interval training. But for continuous run, we definitely rely on threshold training, threshold heart rate.
Very good. I think maybe as a base of a rule of thumb, since we have this blood lactate values here on the screen, I often feel that a lot of work actually, especially in India, is done too fast. That the athletes, when they're doing their continuous runs, that they're going too fast. And that's something we probably have to rethink, that we first build a strong aerobic base. And even if you're affecting the VO2 max, that usually we say we stay around 4 to 7 millimole of lactic acid. That means slightly above this lactic turning point.
Right.
So what is your opinion?
No, the VO2 lactate is 8 millimole, which is 8 to 10 millimole is called the VO2 lactate. So once we are running close to VO2 of any of the endurance group, their VO2 lactate would be close to 7 to 10 millimole, irrespective of their training status. Now, I'm talking about, of course, elite athlete, not the budding athlete. So that is their VO2 lactate. And what is your next question, Volker?
The next question is, that's quite interesting. How does high altitude training affect the endurance of an athlete?
High altitude training, of course, there is, if you are not acclimatized, then it depends on high altitude and high altitude. Altitude training, of course, in a moderate altitude or low altitude, training is required for the athlete for the base preparation. It is fine, but when you are going to moderate altitude of 5,000 feet and above, 6,000 feet, 7,000 feet, then definitely some detrimental effect will set in, because the oxygen availability and the is a lack of oxygen in the system. I mean, because of the partial pressure drops down, atmospheric pressure drops down, because of that the partial pressure drops down. Once the partial pressure drops down, then the PO2 drops down, partial pressure of oxygen in the systemic blood, then there will be the oxygen extraction, the ability of oxygen extracted by the muscle, by the tissue, would be limited. And therefore, when you are not getting the adequate oxygen, then definitely you bound to dilute the training tempo at altitude. I mean, that's why in the competition phase, the camp, the organizer altitude is definitely there is no sense at all, because any of the coach doesn't want to dilute the training tempo, and you cannot maintain the training tempo at the altitude. So therefore, I always believe that, of course, the base preparation, some kind of technical correction, and even to get the benefit of even increasing the hemoglobin. The people say hemoglobin will increase, but hemoglobin will increase, but there are many things will decrease. your entire muscle component, the slow twitch muscle component will reduce because of the appetite depression. There will be some of the enzyme which I talked about. The rate of the enzyme, enzyme will also decrease. So therefore, there is no point of having the camp at altitude in the pre-competition or the just before the competition. Yeah, and I personally believe that if the venue is at altitude, we may have the altitude camp. If the venue is not at altitude, I don't think that altitude camp is really give the justice for the athlete to improve the performance.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much in common with the international trend that the athletes go for the high altitude trains. They have to live there as well. I think you have to spend at least 21 hours a day at these high altitude conditions. But I fully agree with you, and you can even see that the top athletes, if they're going for intensive sessions, maybe twice or thrice a week, they're actually going down to maybe not to sea level, but to maybe 900 meter, 1,000 meter of altitude, because they are conducting the intensive sessions there, and when they're going up to 2,100, 2,200, that's where they do this continuous runs or long, slow distance runs to avoid the negative effects as well. Yeah.
That's really, I just wanted to add one more thing because that stay high and train low is one of the concept of all over the world now, and that's why the hypoxic training, hypoxic thing is being, that is the thing where you can stay at hypoxic chamber and train at the, not at altitude, sea level. Altitude has got the benefit. It increases the hemoglobin content, it increases the capillarization. That is the two aspects which increase. But you need not to dilute the training tempo if your athletes are staying inside the altitude, inside the hypoxic chamber, which can give some training benefit.
Another question, which I feel is quite interesting. If you want to increase your VO2 max, how long is, or what is the best training method to do so in your eyes?
It depends on the VO2 max. That is only possible when you are going for the higher intensity of training close to the maximum oxygen uptake. That is a fast continuous training, or for the longer interval training, longer duration of interval training with high percentage of work, maybe 3 minutes and 3 minutes recovery, 3 minutes activity, like that for the elite runners, where you can give the stimulus close to the VO2 max. So that improves the VO2 max. VO2 max is the earlier days in 70s and 80s and even 90s, the people are very crazy about the VO2 max. Now the thing is, VO2 max is not that important, because there are many things is important, because I told that there are two components of training. One is the central adaptation, one is the peripheral adaptation. The peripheral adaptation is the adaptation in the muscle. If you have the muscular adaptation better, that also will improve your aerobic capacity, as I have shown in my presentation.
I think that's one of the reasons why strength training or strength endurance training for the distance runners also becomes more important these days.
Many of the endurance athletes, they do equally good strength training, and that's important. But now, some days back, one of my friend abroad, he was telling me that even the flexibility, many of the international runners, they used to have less flexibility exercise because it dissipates the elastic energy, because it's a closed cycle. There is not much a different technique involved. In a running gait, it is a same gait, is a closed chain. So if you do a lot of flexibility, then possibly it dissipates the elasticity in the muscle to have the strength. I don't know how much, but the people used to say that.
I think that's a common misconception. We have to differ between the flexibility of a muscle and the stiffness of a joint.
Absolutely.
We see a lot of distance runners who are dealing with several disbalances. For example, that the tibialis muscle is too weak, or the hamstring and the glutes. And that's causing a lot of problems also regarding the disbalance. But I think eventually we have to, and I was very happy that you pointed this out, we also have to mention the biomechanical aspects, because the current world-class athletes, think they have a much better technique in comparison to the athletes like 10, 15 years ago.
Right, absolutely. I mean the total scenario has changed. I mean now whatever the old school and the new school, there are a lot of a mile difference.
Yeah, I think a very important aspect in this context is also the mileage, how much training you need. And we know that, for example, world-class marathon runners, they're running an average. There are two different approaches, and I think there's one intensity approach and one volume approach. And in the volume approach, which is used by a lot of Japanese runners, for example, they're running an average of almost 240 kilometers a week. And even in this intensity approach, which is used by these athletes who having a background on the 10K, who are coming from the track events, they're running on average 180 to 190 kilometers a week. And I think that's something which underlines the importance of having such a strong endurance base and this anaerobic threshold, which you mentioned regarding the marathon.
Again, what you have indicated, that is the difference between quantity and quality, because that quantity is always psyche, because most of the athletes, those who are believe on mileage, if they are short of mileage, then it causes a lot of psychological problem for them rather than the actual physiological problem.
Yes, especially when you're restricted to the training camps, because running on the road in India is probably something you should avoid.
Absolutely.
So training camps for the distance runners, I feel they're becoming even more important in our context.
Right.
Maybe there's a couple of questions. How important is endurance training for sprinters, 100 meter, 200 meter, but also 400 meters? What is your opinion on this topic?
Very valid question, and I don't think that the success rate, except one, I will not name the person who has, 200 and 400 and the world leading athlete. So that's quite, that kind of, combination is, it's a quite deadly combination, because the two energy system, which is entirely different, which because one is ATP-CP system and one is the anaerobic glycolytic system, and the anaerobic glycolytic system, basically the speed endurance is really a killing system among these three systems, which I have talked about. So I really don't know whether it can be in future the runner who are preparing for 100 and 200, whether it's really meaningful, or they have got some kind of logical conclusion or authoritative conclusion about the success of these kind of two runners.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I mean, in all events, we have to consider that the aerobic capacity is also related to the recovery.
Absolutely.
So I feel every athlete, and especially the young ones, they have to develop a decent endurance base as well, because that enables them to have more intensive sessions at a later stage of their career.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
And but we also see, especially in the 400 meters in India, what we've experienced with our national campers, a lot of them are coming from a background where the training looks more like an 800 meter or 1500 meter training rather than a sprint or speed orientated training. And even in the 400 meter, I think the limiting factor eventually becomes the speed. So yeah, I personally, I feel we should definitely cover these endurance sessions, but probably, especially with the younger athletes, twice a week is enough. And we should also not rely too much on this heavy lactic speed endurance work, because from my experience, or from what I know, the physiological responses to this speed endurance training is relatively little, and you don't even have to train them throughout the year, because there's nothing much going on in your body when it comes to the production of lactic acid. What do you think?
In what age?
Yeah, especially when we're talking about developing athletes under 18, under 20.
No. I don't think, because the lactate causes the acidosis so much, it delays the recovery, and unless you have a very solid foundation and you have the proper development of the muscle, so I don't think that if the coaches, I mean, which they don't do normally, but if they rely more on speed endurance and without proper development of the athlete and frequent speed endurance training, obviously it can cause damage for their entire muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
It should not be advocated for.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, and I'm glad that we are of the same opinion here. Okay, I think that was a very informative session, very nice discussion. Dr. Majumdar, thanks you so much for taking your time.
Right.
Volker,
I hope that...
I have one question.
sorry, yeah.
I have one question to Dr. Majumdar.
Yeah,
It has been, the question is from Pratibha Topo. She's a middle long distance coach with Sai. The question is that which athlete is better, whether an athlete with a slot twitch fiber or intermediate type fiber?
Sorry,
Who can improve better?
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There is the echo.
Wait, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely, loud and clear. Yep.
One question from one of the coaches of us. She's asking that which type of athlete is better to have high performance, whether high performance in distance running as well in middle and long distance running, whether slotted muscle fiber type or intermediate type muscle fiber.
Well, that is a oxidative glycolytic would be better fiber, but in which event? You specify the event. I mean, ask him to specify the event.
Even for a long distance.
The long distance, always slow twitch muscle fiber is the essential component for long distance. But you know that the fiber change the characteristics when you expose them to different kind of training. Like if you are gifted with a slow twitch muscle fiber and if you push them to the fast twitch muscle fiber, I mean, push them for the high intensity training, possibly they can have some kind of characteristics will not change. I mean, percentage will remain same, but they will show some kind of characteristics of those fibers. So slow twitch is the essence of distance group. There is no doubt about it. But the middle distance, the mixed fiber would be better. That is the slow oxidative fiber would be the better option. Not the glycolytic, that is the slow oxidative.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. Volker, you can continue.
Yeah, thank you very much. Personally, I would also not spend too much attention to the number of muscle fibers, but because again, it's impossible to identify this. It will be, even if you do a biopsy in your calf muscle, it will be very much different in comparison to the biopsy of your quadriceps muscle or the upper body. So there's no way for us as coaches to ever get a decent understanding about the distribution of muscle fibers. We should focus on these aspects that we actually able to control. And this is, of course, the strength level, the endurance level, as indicated today. Yeah, Dr. Majumdar, thanks a lot. Again, I really hope that we'll be able to implement more of these measurements in our national camps, also for the junior athletes in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel this measurement, especially of the threshold and the VO2 max and the velocity at VO2 max, and this will be very, very helpful indicators for our coaches to improve the quality of their training.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Volker, and my friend who is sitting in the senior ED's office, Mr. Radhakrishnan. And really it's wonderful sharing my, because up to 90 to 2010, I was working with the middle and long distance runner at Bangalore. But after that, you know the scenario. So now, of course, my position is different because I'm in Delhi, sitting at Delhi, and more of administrative work rather than the scientific work. But definitely we are planning to have, I mean, different center to be developed with the equal facility across the country. And definitely we will achieve excellence in future with all your assistance and support and your active participation. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you. Okay, dear participants, yeah, thanks a lot. I think that was a lot to learn today. We will share this presentation also on our website in due time. You can find all other presentations so far already uploaded there, so feel free to download them and to prepare for the upcoming exams. Coach Raj Mohan just shared the link again. It's https and then / indianathletics.in/study-materials-coach/ yeah, that's where you will find all the information. We see you tomorrow, and we will start accumulating all the different loads you had within the last 3.5 weeks, because we will start discussing of how to combine the different aspects of training into one session. And later next week, then we will do that within the season and also within a training week. So thanks a lot to Dr. Majumdar. Thanks for you to joining. Have a good day ahead, and we see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock for the next session on session planning, how to structure your daily training units. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walker. Thank you once again from my side also. Thank you so much, Dr. Majumdar.
Thank you very
And
much.
I like to remind you that today is an important day for us in two ways. That today is World Athletic Day. Otherwise, other thing is that this is the 49th year of establishing our National Institute of Sports, Patiala. It was established in 1961 on 7th of May. So this is a very, it's a very important day for us. And thank you all, especially thank you to Secretary General of Bangladesh and the President of Athletic Federation to join with us. And thank you so much. And thank you, participant. Thank you all. I think I can hand over the session to Mr. Kamal Ali for the attendance purpose. Kamal Ali sir, I am making you host.
Yes.
Okay. Kamal Ali sir, you can mute.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Now I request to all psychotherapists